Hello, I'm George Liston, CA, and this is Dialogue, a weekly exploration into the worlds of international affairs, history, and culture. You may remember seeing the grainy newsreel footage that shows President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in a happy exchange with Saudi Arabian King Abd al-Aziz aboard the USS Quincy during World War II. That symbolizes the start of a partnership that has lasted 6 decades, only to face new challenges and tensions in these early years of the 21st century. Resolving those challenges will certainly require greater reciprocal knowledge of the cultures and social realities faced by these two very different societies. My guest today is Khalid Al-Dakhil, a journalist and assistant professor of political sociology at King Saud University in Saudi Arabia. Khalid, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you for having me.
It's a delight. It's a real pleasure because you are going to give us an opportunity to understand the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia from within, so to speak. And it's a very interesting time there. One of the most interesting things is the reform movement. A petition has gone forth to the government. I think 300 citizens have signed it. You yourself, I believe, are a signatory.
Yes.
Tell us briefly, Khalid, what does the petition call for, and what is your sense of the official reaction to it up to this point?
If I can just add something, that I'm a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Institute.
Yes.
The petition called really for the maximum in terms of demand political and legal and economic reforms in the country. It calls for elections, it calls for democracy, freedom of expression, human rights, rights of women, ending corruption, and all of that. Pluralism, openness. It's an attempt really to transform, or not really to transform, but to start the process, a real process of transforming the Saudi society to go through this transitional phase that it has been going through for the last, I would say, 3 to 4 decades.
To get a dialogue on reform underway.
We want really to establish what I sometimes call the ideological infrastructure for democracy, dialogue, and that is, individualism, freedom of expression, openness, accepting the other point of view, all of that stuff.
Yeah. I'm particularly impressed, Khalid, that 51, I think, of the signatories are women. Homemakers, professional women, students. That strikes me as a very important aspect of this in and of itself. Does it sort of promise greater suffrage for women? And
it is very interesting. The thing you mentioned about the petition, that more than 51 did sign this petition, but also last week there was a big demonstration in Riyadh. And my information says that there were about 2,000 people demonstrating in front of the hotel where the International Conference on Human Rights was held in Riyadh. And there were women participating also in these demonstrations. These two things are really new, significant by themselves, and they indicate that the kind of change that the Saudi society had went through. Many people have this old and sometimes mystic image of the Saudi society. Well, everybody, I think, should understand it's almost an axiom to say that all societies are just the same. They're human beings. Some societies are more advanced than others, but that does not mean that to keep one society or to look at one society and to freeze it at one stage.
Right, the kind of romantic view of
the romantic view. So they would talk about Saudi Arabia as being tribes, the Bedouins, and all of that. So these are part of the nostalgia in Saudi Arabia itself.
The reality is very different.
The reality is different.
Let me ask you a question.
And the concept, if you would allow, the concept of a tribe is just so complicated to comprehend, even for the Arabs themselves.
Right. Your answers are extremely rich. I really appreciate that. And that answer alone, you've told me more about Saudi Arabia than I've heard from many other sources in a long time. I'm very interested because of what you've been saying about the political dynamic. And what I mean by that is statistics, demographically. The country now has 57% of its population under 30 years of age. Mm-hmm. Is that the kind of thing that also fuels an interest in reform?
I think what you have, the whole society was just transformed. You have, for example, the Bedouin structure of the society had almost disappeared completely. Mm-hmm. The elite structure, the traditional elite structure, was replaced by a new one. You have the demographic structure that you talked about, and that is the demographic structure of the society has completely changed.
Right.
So what you have here, I think all of these are turning into new dynamics, pushing the state. Now, the problem is that the society, and this is the irony, the society has changed mm-hmm. and has went really through a tremendous change. The state did not respond in kind.
By the state, we mean the royal family.
And I mean the ruling family and the whole other institutions mm-hmm. related to the ruling family is at the top of the state. And they are one of the main reasons, but not the only reason why the state did not change.
Mm. This is interesting to me because you mentioned a moment ago understanding the nature of tribal relationships is very complex, even when you're a part of it. Uh-huh. And that leads to this, and I hope I can express this question the way I want to, because it seems to me that in getting a response from the ruling family, it's going to first of all depend on some of them seeing the need for this new political dialogue, political participation, but that any agreement to it or any action on it is going to involve consensus. It's really consensual.
It's going to involve consensus within the ruling family right. or between the ruling family and the people themselves.
And the people themselves.
This is, when you talk about, for example, the tribal structure, some people would say that this is the main factor or the main obstacle to change. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not really the main. It's one of the factors involved in here, Mm-hmm. This is a human society.
Right.
There are political interests involved here. There are elite, there are economic interests, mm-hmm. there are cultural values Absolutely. Involved. Mm-hmm. There are tribal also alliances and tribal factors involved here. Mm-hmm. So what you have here is just like any other society, a very complicated picture. Mm-hmm. You need to get close to it and try to comprehend what's going on here. Right. If you talk, for example, about the tribe, what I mean by being complicated, because some people would say, well, tribe is just a group of people moving and having a piece of land and just ruling over this land. Well, I wish it's that simple. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you would have tribes within within a structure of a state.
Right.
Sometimes you will have tribes outside the reach of the state. Sometimes you will have the tribe in between, in the transitional period between, because really a tribe is a phase in the human society. It's a historical phase. And the tribe is very advanced compared to the earlier human development stages. Mm-hmm. So the state is the stage that comes after the tribe. Now, to move from the tribe to the state, this is a very complicated process that involves politics, culture, economics, social relations, economic relations, and all of that stuff.
Right. Sounds like it's something that's constantly in flux, constantly in evolution, constantly changing. It's a process.
It's a
transitional process.
It's not a structure.
Uh-huh.
And it's a process that keeps moving. Now, what we have in Saudi Arabia, we have what I call the tribal ideology, but we don't have the structure of the tribe, because the structure or the tribal structure was destroyed by the state.
Let me ask you a question on that very point. Tribal ideology. Yeah. Everyone associates the Wahhabi tribal reality with the essence of Saudi Arabia. Mm-hmm. But is there a new Wahhabism, so to speak, a new approach within Wahhabi traditionalists to this whole question of reform of the political structure?
Amazingly, George, and the Wahhabi and Wahhabism is anti-tribal. It's anti-tribal. Wahhabism was anti-tribe. Mm-hmm. The Wahhabi movement that came in the 18th century was basically for order and for the state. the notion of the central state, of the Unitarian state, came at the hand of the Wahhabis, not at the hand of the ruling family.
Ah.
By the way, this is a historical fact so many people don't know.
I didn't.
The notion of the state was brought by the Wahhabis themselves. So when you talk that the Wahhabis are terrorists, this is really just misunderstanding the whole damn thing. Yes, there are Wahhabi fundamentalists, Wahhabi radicals. They could turn into terrorists. But that's true.
Yeah, but you're saying you can encounter all forms of political expression within the Wahhabis.
Yes.
I mean, modernists, reformists, traditionalists, and
you have radicals, you have moderates,
everything right across the spectrum.
Yes, across the spectrum. And you have here in Washington what you call the neo-conservatives. We have in Saudi Arabia the neo-Wahhabis.
And that means?
Which means, you know, the central thing about the Wahhabis is this distinction, clear distinction between man of religion and man of the state.
Mosque and state are separate.
Yeah, they are not separate in the sense that you have here in secularism, but they are distinct.
Distinct.
Very distinctive. And each one has his own realm, and no one is supposed to interfere into the realm of the other without the consent of the other. There is this distinction.
Right.
So it could be looked at as a prototype Islamic secularism. So part of this distinction, the Wahhabi cleric, or the Wahhabi alim, or the Wahhabi religious scholar, is by belief, by doctrine, he is against rising against the ruler. He will never sanction taking arms against the state or against the ruler, what they call in Arabic, wali al-amr. Now the neo-Wahhabis, that's what distinguishes them
from the traditional.
From the traditionals, is that they are ideologically Wahhabis, but politically speaking they are not.
Very interesting.
They picked up the idea from the Muslim brothers in Jordan and in Egypt. You know, the Muslim brothers who like to politicize religion and to eliminate this distinction and to say, well, the ideal is to have a religious scholar like Khomeini in Iran to take over the state. The traditional Wahhabi, they are against this notion.
Yeah, so the new activist Wahhabis in this sense would conflate religion.
Would conflate religion and politics.
Exactly.
This way.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. When you look at the Wahhabis, I mean, as they are in this way, it would be very puzzling. How could such an institution become a terrorist institution? They cannot be.
You know, this is a perfect example of what you were saying earlier about the importance of not seeing things in a static way in Saudi Arabia. Not just saying the Wahhabis are this way and they've been this way, but it's much more complex than that.
Exactly.
That's very obvious. Khalid, how far can reform go? I mean, the movement has been it's been broached, it's been put forward, it's in process. I mean, there are going to be, I'm sure, conflicts and issues and everything else. But what should we expect? I mean, what do you expect, more importantly?
Well, this is really a very difficult question. I'm involved in the reform movement myself, and I know it's not an easy, really question to answer. We have hopes. At this point, they took this small step of having a municipal election next year, and this is supposed to be the beginning of real reform in the country. We have been promised that we will have elections for Majlis al-Shura, that is the Consultative Assembly, which is the equivalent of the Congress here.
Right. Is the idea that the Majlis Shura would be 30% elected? Is that the goal?
They will start. The idea is to start with electing 30% of Majlis al-Shura. Then they will create this new position in the cabinet, in the Council of Ministers. That is the position of a minister for the Majlis al-Shura affairs.
Right.
So would be sort of a liaison between the Council of Ministers and the Majlis al-Shura.
Right. And then presumably that percentage of elected participants might grow over time from that point on?
Well, that is really the intention. That's what they say, is to start with electing 30%, and then perhaps we will go to 50, 60%,
right.
And then for the whole members being, for the whole council being an elected body.
Right. This raises two things that I think are very important to comment on. One is people observing this, outsiders like us, should understand this is incremental, right? I mean, it's going to be an incremental process.
That's what we understand.
That's what you understand.
Yeah.
And secondly, and perhaps even more importantly, I'll pose it as a question. Is it extremely important that this be entirely a Saudi initiative, as it is at the moment, untainted, if you will, by outside Western influence? In other words, is this something that the West should keep its hands off, or what is the role
I
of
think
the
West in general,
and the U.S. in particular,
and the U.S. in particular, should not interfere with this process. This is something that should be homegrown. The impulse should become from inside. The process should start and end from within. Yes, the U.S. or the West or any other party, they would like to encourage here and there, to say something positive about it. That's their business. Right. To have whatever the reaction they want. But they should not get involved in this. Because if they do, I would think they are going to derail the process.
Yeah. Let me expand that to a regional question, if I might, about Iraq, in which the United States has obviously intervened, invaded and occupied the country. And one of the stated goals the administration has put forth is the democratization, if you will, of Iraq. I think you are on record as saying you feel that's going to have the reverse effect, that this outside interference of this kind, you don't, well, I don't want to put words in your mouth. What do you think of it?
Well, they can talk about democracy here, and I really hope this is where is it going to lead to. But I don't believe, if you talk about democracy in a country like Iraq, can you imagine the United States having a government deciding about oil, about economic, about contracts, about all of, this is a very rich country with very rich resources. Now, shall I expect the U.S. to come and they spent so far, they are going to spend at least $150 billion, if not $200 billion. And so many Americans are going to be, either dead or injured. Are they going to do this just for the sake of bringing democracy? In this sense, I would think of the Pentagon as a charity organization. I don't think it's like that. I don't think any Ministry of Defense, anywhere in the world, is a charity. States are states. They are very jealous of their interest. They are always after their interest. So when they talk about democracy, they are talking, I would think, about a certain political system that will be within the limits of the interest of the United States. So what kind of democracy is that going to be? I don't know. This governing council in Iraq, I don't see that it enjoys that much degree of legitimacy. Because let's remember that these people came on the back of the American tank, of an invading power. I think the Iraqis, the Arabs, are happy that Saddam Hussein is gone, especially the Iraqis. Nobody is, I would think at least the majority are happy when Saddam Hussein is gone. The question is, how was he removed, and what is the price for that, and what is going to replace that?
Yeah, and on that question of the price, you say the states have their interests, and you're right. Yeah. Cultures have their interests formed over ages, as we know.
Exactly.
And I think you said in one of your articles that you've seen this whole exercise in Iraq as, and I hope I quote you correctly, as a kind of a challenge to Arab credibility and in the region. Is that right?
It is.
Yeah.
The fact that twice, in 1991 and in 2003, now we know all the Arab states, at least most of them, they really wanted Saddam to be removed, but they cannot do anything about it. When he invaded Kuwait, they wanted to get him out of Kuwait, but they cannot. Militarily, they could. They have the money, they have the power.
Right.
And they could, coordinate and have the support of the West and the United States, and they could have done it themselves. But politically, they cannot.
Right.
They would have, they had to bring the United States to take Saddam out of Kuwait for them.
Right.
And then to come again and take him out of power in Iraq. This, I would think that this indicates political weakness and vulnerability on the part both of the Arabs and the Iraqis. Because the Iraqis did not want Saddam, but they could not do anything about it.
Let me probe you on that. That statement you just made about this demonstration as being one of Arab and Iraqi weakness in a certain political sense. Is that also your sense about the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, in that, and I believe you've also written on to this effect, that what the Arab nations need as a general principle is a kind of a consensual, comprehensive strategy that has yet to emerge. Is that right? Do you take them to task for that?
Well, the Arabs are weak on every front almost. Whether you're talking about economic or political, they are weak. For example, if you take Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, they have been having oil for half a century now, at least. And what's the end result of that? You can see for yourself, both politically and economically. Now, this is not because this guy is, a traitor, or this government is a traitor. No, you have weakness. And when I talk about weakness, I'm talking about institutional weakness, political weakness, cultural weakness, intellectual weakness. We are not just in it yet. That's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's why when we talk about the balance of power between the Arabs and the Israelis, it's not just the military balance. That's the most obvious aspect of this formula. But you have weakness, you have cultural balance,
right?
You have intellectual balance,
right?
You have political balance.
Yeah, and I think you said one direct effect of this is that the Israelis, for example, will go into negotiations with a determined purpose and strategy. Very often, their Arab counterparts don't have that strategy yet.
They don't have, because they cannot agree. That's the problem. They cannot agree on a united position, at least a coordinated position.
Right.
When the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia submitted his peace initiative to the last Arab summit in Beirut.
Recognition of Israel in exchange for observation of the...
But notice one thing. Hosni Mubarak, the president of Egypt, refused to attend. He sent someone to represent him there. Why? Because, he thought, the show in the summit will be stolen by the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and I'm the president of Egypt, and I should not just contribute to that.
Khalid, this conversation with you has been extremely stimulating to me, I must say. We must do this again and often, I would hope, certainly for me and for those watching. And I want to conclude with this question, because if I can try to make a connection between the various things we've talked about, it seems to me, but what's at stake here, particularly with the reform movement in Saudi Arabia, coming back home to what we started with, it's the definition of Arab identity in the face of changing circumstances, of youth, a more youthful population. And one thing we haven't discussed, globalization as a factor in all of this. But is that right? Is what is needed and what underway to get that kind of strategy we just mentioned is not there yet? A dialogue, if you will, among...
I think I think it's upon now the government, the rulers in the Arab world. They chose to monopolize decision-making, whether in regard to politics, economic, education, and all of that stuff. So the end result is their responsibility. They chose to take a monopoly of that. They chose not to open a channel of participation by the people in making all of these decisions, and fateful decisions, and the end result is their responsibility. They will have to move. They will have to open up.
The governments.
The governments, the rulers.
Right.
They will have to open up to their people. They would have to be open to their people. They would have to allow people really to get into the process and to make a choice for themselves through the government. If they don't do that, then I think the problem is going to be just to get worse in the Arab world.
And I think you as a journalist are a big part, and other journalists, of course, in encouraging that dialogue. I mean, and I also think that people are getting far more information through Al Jazeera and other sources about what's going on, and so that's going to pressure those governments too.
That's one of the problems, George, we have there. I mean, these governments still think on the basis of the old concepts of the 60s and the 50s. They don't allow this book to get in, they don't allow this information to get out, they don't allow this person to go. Well, we are, as you said, in the age of globalization, in the age of the internet. You cannot hide information from people.
That's right, that's absolutely right.
They can get it through so many channels, through so many sources. So it is stupid on the part of this government, really, to stick with their old policy. This shows how weak they are.
Absolutely.
They cannot move.
Right, and I guess one of the greatest weaknesses any government can have is not recognizing the times in which they live, understanding that these phenomena are all around them.
Exactly.
People have the information, and so the government should.
I mean, the people in a country like Saudi Arabia or in Egypt, you have the demographic structure there, at least 50 to 60% the youth population.
Right, right.
I mean, this kind of population, they have demands, they have energy,
I think
they have aspirations.
That's indeed they do, and talent.
Yes.
And that is either a great potential boon, treasure for the government, or it's a time bomb, because the one thing or the other will happen.
Exactly.
Khalid, it's been a delight talking with you, I must say. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've been educated by it. And I think those viewing have as well. Thank you, my friend.
Nice talking to you.
My friend.
Thank you
My
very
pleasure.
Much.
And that's our program. We welcome the comments of our viewers, and you can contact us at dialogue@wwic.si.edu. I'm George Liston, CA, and you have been watching Dialogue, a co-production of MHC Networks and the Woodrow Wilson Center. We come to you every week from the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center in the heart of Washington, D.C. Please join us again right here next week, and thanks for watching.
Coming soon on Dialogue.
Why would, a brilliant American theater producer and director and thinker want to take her grant money and go to Russia? The reason was that was where innovation was happening. And American artists knew that very, very well.